So you'd be able to correct me if I'm totally bullshitting. Just say it.
I would never.
Okay. So I believe product management is a combination of many roles. So you have to have a CTO role within the product management. So that means the process, the stack of the software, all the stuff has to touch you at some point when decisions are getting made. So you can't really say, okay, I'm the product manager, I'm only going to say, I like this feature, I want this to be blue. Just go do it. That should never happen. Your developers should be able to actually rise up and actually argue with you that they need more. If you let them go, it might be blue, but it would be baby blue and you're really thinking navy. And the button was supposed to be very small to make the whole page elegant, but they just made the entire page elegant. So there's a lot of little different things that you actually have to talk about when you want to give a developer or the development team some direction. Now, I'm a fan of process. I love processes. I'm a startup guy, and a lot of folks believe process in a startup is redundant. It's just those are not really synonym terms, but I believe they are. You set process, make it dynamic, and depending on the folks, you actually change the process. So I'll talk about how you translate and communicate the feature specifications to the developers. And then I'll talk about how to actually tell the developers how to refine it, how to make it better, if there's a simple tweak, a tiny tweak to make to it, how to communicate to it. So what I have up there is a company called User Voice. They have a really awesome blog post about how they use Trello, which is a task management system, to actually manage their entire development environment. So I used this about 10 months ago at the company I'm in now. I implemented exactly that, and now our process is a little bit different. So what this guy actually says, the roadmap box, each one of these boxes actually you see, in Trello terms are called a board. But imagine they're just a place that you can have tickets or projects, and you can collaborate on it, and you have different people in each box. So the roadmap box is the CEO and whoever's high touch with the clients. So I believe you ladies would be high touch with the clients. So you all sit down, you talk about a specific feature. For example, I'm in a company called the Mini Box, and we deal with restaurants and hospitality. So we were talking about how to manage a company's campaign properly. So I'm sitting there, I understand SaaS and mobile very well. That's my forte. I do not understand restaurants other than going and ordering and eating and leaving. The CEO has owned a bunch of restaurants. He's dealt with this. He's also a little techie. He gets it. The marketing folks understand the customer itself. We all get in a room. We talk about what this could become. So at that point, I don't include the developers. They don't really need to be there to hypothesize what this feature could look like. What is it going to touch? So we come up with, what do we want the campaign manager to look like? What should it do? What are the general goals for this feature? We come up with a set. It has to be very high level. It should not at all be low level. And then everybody leaves. Me and the CEO sit down. We actually think about how the interface will look like. When we have some idea, we bring the developers in. The devs at that point would be able to say, well, there's a data dependency that this whole thing that you envision has to work differently. And it's going to run into these bugs. So we have these bugs in the backlog that haven't been fixed, and it kind of affects this. What I personally do at that point, the developers have given their input. I actually sit down and wireframe the entire feature streams. Well, again, being a startup guy, I tend to do a lot of stuff myself rather than push it off to designers. So I'll do the wireframing. I talk to my designer, see what he thinks about it. He pushes a touch. At that point,
yeah, I think there in that process, I think it would be important to define your role. So there you're covering UX.
yeah.
Like you're the product manager, and then you're doing UX.
Yeah.
Some of the UI probably as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think you need to define those roles for those that aren't startups.
Yeah, so I just did a blog post last week about how product product management is a combination of 8 roles. So you are a UI designer, you are a UX designer, you are a project manager because you deal with process, you are a CTO, you're in marketing because you sometimes do growth hacking. Like at this point, half of my time is actually spent on growth hacking. You still are a CEO because that entire product that you're managing, you have to hustle it for it and actually make sure that goes somewhere meaningful. So I don't know if those were 8s or my blockbuster 8. I have to figure. Oh, there's also sales. So you have to talk to the clients. Not only that, you have to figure out which other companies you want to partner with. Instead of actually going in and spending 3-4 months in developing a feature, you'd rather partner up with somebody that actually has a huge client base already. Plug them in. If they have an idea, I can actually see it better. If not, it's going to get weird. And make sure that that partnership brings value. So you have to understand sales. So what I'm talking about includes all the little pieces of all those roles in there. In bigger organizations, product manager, like a lot of talks we hear right now, they're not startup focused, they're very corporate. They talk about, like the first one I sat in was a pricing one, and we figured out our pricing structure in a day. It was me, the CEO, the marketing guy, and we called different folks in, and we needed to ask separate questions, and we just, mind you, it was not all us thought out this process that the general was proposing. So, going back to the process I mentioned, yes, I do the UX, I do some of the UI, some of the stuff that I just can't think about, like which color am I going to use, which gradient and all that stuff, I just push it back to my graphics designer.
What I'm saying is that although you embody all those functions, those could be separated.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The people that do them better than you can do them more.
Oh, I'm pretty sure UX-wise, those UX designers that blow me out of the water, I'm not even good at that. So, at that point, the wireframes are there. I meet with the CEO to make sure that it fits the objectives, fits the high-level requirements that the devs gave us, the restrictions and all that. And then we have a general scope meeting. So all the devs come in, even if it's not at all what they deal with. So with us, we have a hardware piece or company. It's the TVs you see outside restaurants that shows their menus and stuff. The developers that even deal with that come in. Everybody, because they will understand some of the requirements that we might not think about. So those guys come in, it's me, the CEO, all the different folks that I had in the roadmap meeting, so maybe the marketing folks, maybe the support folks. At that point, we get into the trenches. We actually get to talk about what this actually could mean, how long would it take, which classes maybe you'd hit. At some point, some of the folks might leave because it doesn't really relate to them anymore. But that's the main meeting, that if you screw up that meeting, a month later or whenever the milestone is done, your whole effort might be screwed. Go for it.
Sorry, I might have missed it. What's the size of the company again?
We're 25 folks here, 10 in India.
So all 25 of those folks are jumping into this meeting where they're talking
No.
about...
No. In a regular scope meeting, it's about 7 to 10 folks.
Okay. Do they tend to be development leads or they're developers? Or?
So we have a lead developer, we don't have a CTO. I tend to cover some of that. So the lead developer comes in, we have 5 developers in-house, they all come in. The head of production, which manages the client request for design and for all the different stuff, she comes in, she understands the clients pretty well. Director of marketing and the CEO. It's usually these folks. So at this point, the project is somewhat scoped. We understand what we want to build. We understand that there's limitations. Developers are already in, but do not at all assume that they understand exactly what's going on. Because most of the project was in our heads. And we think visually, we think clients, we think what the color would actually mean to the user. It's hard to translate that to developers, and they might not even do it. Usually they don't. So you take all that out. At that point, I sit down, I put a feature list together. These are all the features I want to have in this. And I can go as granular as it is, or as high level as I can. I try to stay at a good balance, just so I don't say, user needs to publish a campaign. That's really high level. I have to say user needs to initiate the process of publishing the campaign, which also includes this. That would be the general feature. At that point, I have a separate meeting with the devs. We figure out the user stories. They estimate it. They tell me how many hours, if you guys do t-shirt sizes, or any other thing, the Fibonacci sequence. A lot of folks do it differently. User voice does it in the Fibonacci sequence. We figure out how many hours there are, figure out how much the guys want to do per sprint, and development starts. So sprint is just a unit of measurement for development. It doesn't mean anything else. Let's say we have weekly sprints. That means in that week, I'll assess what the guys have done. They have to show us what they've done. It has to be at a point that they can demo something, even if it's like, oh, the data goes here and here's the table that's already public. It doesn't have to be a UI. So we develop a milestone for this campaign builder. This milestone, let's say, is 5 weeks, it's 5 sprints then. Every sprint we have to hit certain parts to say we're on the right track. If not, then we tweak it. We say, okay, we probably have to add another week. During each sprint, the developer talks to me most often. I explain the feature again. See, they were probably in 4 meetings up to now. We still have to talk. And I love my devs. We go out to pubs every night after work almost, and there's a really good relationship there. But when it actually comes to communication, you have to make sure you overdo it until you actually feel like they get it.
Could you just say a little bit more about that? How do you decide the appropriate level of detail between high level and very detailed project?
I tried really hard to come up with a rule of thumb for that, and at the end, it depends on your team. It depends on how much of the details can you leave at a non-verbal level that they get anyway. So if a developer's been in your company for a year, he probably understands a lot of the different terminology and lingo and all the different general things that you would say about a feature, because he's been there, he's already seen the app. If they've just joined, you actually have a hard time. At that point, I let the other devs explain.
I think the only thing that might progressively become less spoken is the acceptance criteria. Like all the things surrounding the task. Like you still need to define the task very accurately as far as what you want.
Right.
And then the acceptance criteria, like within this environment, it needs to work.
Right.
That's the stuff that probably doesn't need to get reiterated time and time again over a year.
Absolutely.
Once they get it, they get it.
Absolutely. And that's one of the main roles of the CTO or the lead developer. So that's a gentleman that, or lady, very rarely, that very rarely, that actually manages the entire technology stack. This person knows all the different plugins, all the different technologies that we're using in the entire application. Some of the devs might only work with a few of them, but that person needs to have a holistic view of the entire thing. So if that person's always in the meetings, then that should be covered. Mind you, it's not always covered. People miss things.
So going back to Trello that used to be up on the screen.
Yeah.
So we kind of skipped over sprints, but how, I guess, do you as a product manager then put all of these tasks, detailed tasks, into the product backlog, and then do your developers pull them into a sprint?
So I implemented the general Scrum system in the company I used to, it was my own company, and I noticed that it failed. I noticed that it was an unnecessary step. So user voice does it the same way. So everything from roadmap, all those meetings of figuring out exactly what it's supposed to look like, those happen when you want to push something from roadmap to planning. When you get into planning, that's when design happens. That's when you actually figure out your user stories. That's when you figure out estimations. Then the product backlog is just in planning. It's just one task list in planning that all relates to a specific feature. And for each sprint that actually needs to go on, I push that amount into current development. So within current development, there's a list of tasks, and the developers can pick anything they want within the task. But I usually try not to let them pick tasks that are meant to be in the third sprint, in the first sprint.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, just because I noticed that dependencies rising, and some hours, maybe days of development could actually go unused, or just So
they want that from you.
I have a technical background, and I can go head tech with them at some point.
But
Our-
they want to.
So depends. Our stack is PHP. It's a lab stack, and I know Ruby on Rails. I don't know PHP. I can look at the code and make sense of it, but I'm not good at it. So what I would do when I'm talking about the specific feature that this developer has chosen to do, I sit with them and I just try to throw questions at them for him to figure out what to do. If he notices there's a problem, then all the other devs are there. We'll just talk about it. Or the lead dev actually jumps in and we figure out what to do. I will try to lead him to figuring out what the solution is, but I will never dictate it because I don't think I know it.
Do you depend on him to give you the plan estimate?
Absolutely.
Breakdown?
Absolutely. You always want to get a time estimate for the task from the developer that's about to do it. I tried for 4 sprints to get the lead developer to do it, and anything was like, yeah, this is easy, that's a day. Ended up being a week, because he thought it was like a simple HTML, CSS change, but no, the entire database schema had to change, because this whole data structure didn't fit with how the API call was supposed to actually be resolved. It can run into really weird situations. So, for figuring out what business goals and what the UX is supposed to be, and if it fits your style guide, that's not on the devs. Anything else, you're not in charge. Devs are in charge. You're just supposed to empower them to make sure they do the best thing they want to do. And culture-wise, if you have marketing folks, sales folks, management, we all love money. And you could, at some point, you can entice the person and actually incentivize them with money. The developer's not like that. The developer doesn't care if you say, okay, if you get your shit done, I'll give you like $500 this month. That goes way, that does way less than actually him loving working with you or working with the other team and make sure there's no stress there, and him doesn't hating someone. It happens so much. Whenever support deals with development, there's hate. Because the client is yelling at the support person. And they're like, oh my God, this whole thing doesn't work. It's a simple shit. Why didn't you fix it? The support person doesn't really understand the feature. Doesn't really understand how deep this feature goes. It goes straight to the dev and screams at the dev. The person's already stressed, they're pissed, they're under so much pressure. The dev's just doing their own thing, they're playing Tetris, whatever they're doing. And then it comes out of nowhere, this guy screams. There's always hate there. So what you should do, what we did, we have Zendesk for support. We have hardware, we have software, so our support tickets are kind of weird. But I always say, everything goes in support, everything. Everything goes in Zendesk. If we notice this is a bug, if we notice this is something that actually has to hit development, then it goes into planning. I'll plan it and I'll figure out if it should go in or not. Or if it's something that I don't want to touch right now. If it's a bug that that I think it should be there. I don't care if the bug's there because I have other stuff that I want to fix right now. So, go ahead.
I think one of the most important things that I stress to product and project managers that are now jumping into technical projects is the importance of working in the project management software that the developers are using.
Yeah.
The easiest way for non-technical people to communicate, definitely email. Just shoot an email over the fence and hope that it gets logged back what you want. When you're dealing with something like Trello or Pivotal Tracker or Jira, whatever it is, you can see all the user stories lined up, all the things that you want done, all the features, and the things that have been pulled into the current sprint. Rule of thumb is you should fill up those sprints about 80% capacity, and it'll get done. But customer needs something, or your boss is on you about something, or something comes up and needs to change, and something becomes top priority. You know, it's easy to send that email over, just drop everything you're doing, work on this. But it's so much better if you can go into Trello and say, oh, these are the priorities. Well, actually, this is still more important. This is more important. Slot it in there. This gets pushed out of the sprint, so you still retain the 80% capacity. And if you're working in the same tool, that whole process is very apparent.
Absolutely.
Rather than expecting people to do the impossible.
Absolutely.
More about their motivation. That's helpful. I mean, on the marketing side, we're motivated by, of course, money and happy customers. So to have that be entirely the opposite, that would help. Just understand that.
Sure. They don't code anymore. They loved it if the atmosphere of the company, who they dealt with and what they did was interesting to them. You'd love working with your friend, mind you, working with a friend is always weird, but you'd love working with your friend than with your enemy, because you're comfortable. And developers love that. So I just hired a front-end developer. I'm hiring another one actually on Monday. And I'm bringing all my devs with, afterwards, when the person has already done the first part of the interview, then the test, afterwards, we're just gonna sit around and we're gonna talk. If I notice the person doesn't really fit well with the other ones, I'm not gonna hire them. Because that just breaks down everything else. It's not about if I like them or not. It's not about if the CEO likes them or not. It's about if the devs like the guy who's gonna be added to their team. You're gonna have to talk to this guy every day. So that environment, and it's I've heard people call it childish, I've heard people call it immature, but that's what is actually important to those folks. It's them being comfortable with what they're doing and liking what they're doing. If you bring too many critical, super high priority tasks that came out of nowhere to them, they will do it unwillingly. They probably do it half-assed. And if you do it too many times, they will probably lose it and tell you that I don't like this. I don't like what I'm doing. I have to hack things together, and I don't like the quality of code that I'm producing. And then your motivation decreases.
But I think what you're talking about becomes more normal as you develop it yourself. I know that as business people, sometimes developers feel like quite institutions.
Yeah.
And I don't think in general, but finding points of reference where we're kind of on a level and kind of get that trust can be quite difficult because we look at things in a very different way.
Yeah.
And so, the same way you're asking about, and if you're saying that the kind of friendly environment is important, can you recommend it by people who perhaps aren't from that kind of background, aren't from a technical background, can kind of hack that to be friendly with them, or kind of find points of reference, to be able to bother them, instill that confidence in them.
Right.
You're kind of like people like that.
So to me, there are two ways of overcoming an obstacle. One is to fix it, and one is to make sure it never happens. So with the process that I put in and we tweaked, salespeople don't need to talk to developers. Support people don't need to talk to developers. Developers talk to me, and I talk to them. And within the process, it's not that I'm a single point of failure. Anybody can track what I'm doing, and they can actually take over if I get hit by the bus. So some of our support folks actually love hanging out with our devs outside in their own friendly environment. But I know actually one of our sales guys, he is a pain to deal with for anybody, but he's an amazing salesman. He's a bulldog that sees a door and chews down. And if you happen to be the door, you're getting chewed down. So that's one of the things that I would just erase the problem. I would try to make the problem never happen, just to make sure that they don't talk to the developers at all. They would talk to me, they would talk to CEO, and then somehow would get to me, or I would just attend all those meetings. I'm very hands-on myself, but in bigger organizations, it's a little different. And developers do seem to be different types of species. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. I never really fit well with them. I never really fit well with the sales guys or anyone else, just because I was kind of like them, but not like them, because I was like the other ones. It's all a different situation. Go for it.
I would disagree with the hiring strategies. If that's not the thrust of your workshop, I'll ignore it.
How would you, what is your suggestion on tweaking that?
Well, I think just the whole like sitting around and making sure that they can chat and so forth, that it needs to be a community of programmers.